Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the batch video for the web novel Thieves Dungeon from the website Royal Road. This video will contain chapters 1.1 to 1.4, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 1.1 Plans Within Plans. Olin Frampt hated funerals. He loved wearing black, but people got upset if he wore anything interesting. Today, the city's dwarves laid Morgul out on a slab of stone and wept over him. Olin stood at the back of the procession, wearing a midnight rose with a diamond-studded collar, and its swooping neckline appeared his muscled chest all the way down to his navel, and a daring V lined by milk-white wolf fur. Dark looks were aimed his way. He smiled back. Avery stood next to him, conservatively dressed in black leather. "I can't believe he's dead," Olin remarked. "It's been, 20 years since the last time?" "A solid record. I think the cleric who revived him last time actually passed of old age," Avery admitted. "But who are you to talk? You've never died, have you?" "Imagine, Olin Frampt, a virgin!" A smirk oozed across her face. "If you think about it, it means I'm winning," Olin hissed. "This woman got under his skin so easily. If you ask me, it means that you haven't been playing hard enough." The smirk again. Tantalizing. He just shook his head. Impossible to argue with her. Impossible. "This dungeon, what are we going to do about it?" Avery continued. "I think it's safe to say that it can defend itself. If we let people know, we'll just be feeding it mana from all the greenhorns that go to investigate themselves." "Feeding it mana," Olin repeated. "You know." It was his turn to smile in the slimiest, smuggest smile. "That doesn't have to be a bad thing." And while he still had a conventional advantage, Olin turned and strode away. Or he tried to. His stride was interrupted as he turned to find a blind priestess standing behind him, clouded eyes staring out through the owl-faced mask. For once he was genuinely speechless. There was something about the girl that he just found eerie. It felt like she could see into his shriveled black soul. "Morgul said that the dungeon used to be yours. I wanted to ask about it." The Institute of Magi was spectacularly well guarded. Steel golems and expressionless helmets for faceless stood by the vast double doors. A thin, almost unnoticeable layer of spellwork was spread across the windows like a web of translucent energies. A circle around the entire building prevented teleportation within. These were just the outermost layer, the obvious safeguards meant to catch large threats, rather than the finer net laid out for thieves. The golems would only move if the Institute itself was threatened. The spellwork was only there to keep forbidden magic from entering or leaving. The real defenses would be inside, and even getting there was my first concern. Strix had warned me that their measures against scrying, and that my connection to my minions would likely trigger them. Apparently, even her own owls could get too close to it. But she could. Olin selected his drinks with a religious care. Selecting a fat-bellied bottle, he poured a clear, reddish absinthe into a pair of tall glasses, topping it off with a splash of milky liqueur that spiraled into the glass like an inverse coil of a snake. They drained his in a single gulp, and he looked down to find Strix still trying to find hers, blind fingers feeling their way across his desk. He quietly slid it further out of her grasp. "I still don't understand why I can't bring my owls," she complained. "It would run afoul of my eye blight. Horrible beastie. It lives in a pocket dimension space outside of our reality. If it catches someone scrying, it uses a mental link like a fisherman uses a hook, and reels the mind of the other end into its lair, where it gobbles them up, of course." Olin explained with a faint smile playing across his face. Of all his monstrosities, the eyebright was his most creatively awful. "But," he continued, "as much as I'd love to give you my tour of my bestiary, I don't think that's what you're here for, is it now?" "No. This dungeon was too intelligent. I want to know where you found it." Even with her blind and the heart of his power, Olin found himself shivering when she looked directly at him with those seer eyes. Too many secrets, he chided himself, too many schemes. The thought of someone seeing into his heart and seeing all that he'd done was enough to make a prickle of sweat break out of his forehead. Up in God Country, of course, a little farmstead on the edge of the shiftlands found her washed up. They were treating it like a pet. Olin let out a story in there, without mentioning what he'd done to them. They shouldn't be intelligent at all. It was bound while I was still young and crippled in all the right ways. So crippled that I didn't even bother keeping it. So you gave it to Boss Gent. Now that's a very kind way to refer to the deceased. Whatever he was accused of, he was good for the city, Olin chided. So you gave it to Boss Gent, and when he died it escaped, she repeated. How could it become intelligent? How am I supposed to know? Olin was irked. He was irked by her eyes staring at him pointlessly, by the unflinching attitude in which she sat there judging him, by the way she seemed to ignore half he said and threw up his hands. If a crippled dungeon did become whole, it was by divine intervention. Your field, not mine. He was irked. He had been since Morgul died. Not that he cared about the old fool. But Olin wasn't an idiot. He could read the winds. Something had gone terribly wrong beneath his city. So you couldn't fix a crippled dungeon if you had to. Was she challenging him? Olin leaned forward, one hand perched on his desk below and the other splayed across his chest. I could, but I did not. And there is no other Olin Fremt. What would it take? He sighed. A dungeon core is a source, a heart of magic, surrounded and stabilized by the bindings of the divine. To heal a crippled one, you would need a high mage of incredible talent to unwind the divine strictures, a powerful soul to give it sapience again, and another source to restore its wounds, preferably another core. But none of that happened. Never mind sneaking another high mage into the city, unbinding a source. I would know right away. Asterix stood in my domain, reciting what she'd been said. I felt a strange sensation, an almost déjà vu, as if there was something lost to me. And there was. I had been crippled, reduced to less than a beast, to a gaudy trinket on a crime boss's fingers. My memories were gone. I might not even be the same soul I had been. It was only now that I even understood the extent of the damage done. I knew that I had a soul, that was clear by the fact that gods wanted me to trade it away. But I was not whole. I was too limited, too weak for a dungeon. If I was going to fix that, I needed another source. And before any of that, I had to get a rum back. The Eyeblight would be the first hurdle, a horror hiding in a side dimension. Any of my creations with shards would be pulled in by the connection to me. I was blocked out so long as it lived. The priest tapped her foot, waiting for me to return her owl, but I was deep in thought. Argent scuttled along the fence posts, down the gutter pipes, fought with the squawking pigeons for space amongst the rooftops, as she found the flow of servants leaving the institute for the night. It took all kinds to run such a massive, sprawling building. Maids, porters, butlers, cooks. They flooded out in the not-so-grand back doors and into the settling night. We could only follow one of them, and it was like picking a single droplet out of an ocean of humanity. Tonight we settled on a sad-eyed, waxen-faced cook. We followed him back to the flophouse on a quiet life. Nothing. No help at all. We were fishing, praying one of the nets would catch something our way in. Today was another failure. Tomorrow we'd pick someone else out of the crowd to watch, until we found our way in. Olin Fremt couldn't settle his nerves. The encounter with the priest had left him riled up, agitated. He paced the room and back again, and again, and again. Through the glass cage, the beautiful green viper with a streak of draconic gold lay curled, waiting, watching him, and always with the unblinking eyes. Those eyes had intelligence behind them for Olin to feel hatred in the stare. He smirked, his fingers tapped the glass. Oh, I have such plans for you, my precious. End of chapter. Chapter 1.2 Legitimate Business. The three men made their way through the sewers, all of them roaring drunk. Two of them were armed swords, tapping against their legs as they walked, while the third carried nothing but a small knife and a pipe that he kept lit, the thick wreaths of pungent smoke protecting him from the smell of the sewers. He was a small man, round in the middle, with a beak of a nose and stubble dotting the jowls that hung down on either side. His name was Treblin. which was another way the gods had done him wrong. But if there was one thing going for him, he owned a damn fine tricorn hat, and his men called him captain. The other two were the usual sorts, tough with bad teeth and worse attitudes. One of them had to pause every now and again, peering at the walls, reading the signs the thief had marked there. "Crosswise there." "Are we sure?" Captain Trevelyan asked, taking a pipe from his mouth. "Because I remember the way we came in, and I don't remember this. How can you remember which way is all tunnels? Anyway, all looks the same." The man mumbled under his breath, although not quietly, that Trevelyan couldn't hear him. "Would I be captain if I got lost easily?" The man leaned in, taking a close look at the sign that had been partially obscured by a cluster of fat puffball mushrooms. Trevelyan was the only one who saw the mushrooms suddenly quiver, and the man approached. "Down!" he yelled, but it was too late. As he dived for the floor, there was a sharp pop and a scream, and the fungi burst apart explosively and sprayed chitinous fragments into the man's skull. There was nothing left of his face but blood. Behind him, an enormous man had stepped into the passageway. No, not a man. He was made of dirt. Fungal crops sprouting from his broad, hunched back, his face featureless except for a single green eye. A golem. While the one man screamed and clutched his ruined face, the other stepped forward, plunging his sword into the golem's gut. Trevelyan could have told him that it would be useless, but earth poured from the wound of the golem and lifted up the club arm, with a single crashing blow settling things, sending Trevelyan's crewmates slumping to the floor. Trevelyan turned and ran. The golem saw no reason to hurry after him. It tossed one man over his shoulder and grabbed the other man under his arm, and started walking slowly in the direction that Trevelyan had run. It found him slumped over, asleep, as he had stumbled into a tall cluster of somnolent blooms and being coated in sleeping spores, his face fat and peaceful as a baby's as he snored. Adamant stepped over him. It felt strange calling the new golem Adamant, but his mind really did feel the same. It all came from the shard after all. Any differences I chalked up to having given him the blessing of the Earth-Shaper, making him considerably more intelligent and more introspective than he had been. Better yet, it had made him less clumsy, since the stone he had now controlled included his own body. He had brought me 3 fresh humans, lured in by Isis's altering the thief signs, marking the tunnels towards the black markets to lead people to me instead. It was a simple trick, but the best tricks were simple. Too clever a scheme would attract dozens of people, and one of whom might slip away and spread the news of my existence. A very crude trap would only catch easy prey. At my command, Adamant broke the neck of both men. I devoured them, leaving behind a neat pile of clothes where each had been. Nothing fashionable, alas, but a good honest thieves' garb. Midnight black cloaks and dark grey shirts, scarves that could be drawn over the faces, and harlequin masks for the silent market. Lopping away, my golem returned the 3rd man. This one hadn't tried to fight. He was a coward, and a coward was useful to me. I had built a cage in the centre of my garden, and I resembled a bird's cage made of green plain glass, rising out of the fields of mushrooms like a strange pagoda. The garden itself was changed, in a fit of pique brought on by having to rebuild it for a 3rd time. I had made the mushrooms translucent, dulling their colours, making them resemble strange bubbling shapes of glass. I had added tall flowers and sharp geometric petals that made keening notes as the wind blew. It was a glass garden now, sharp and strange and beautiful. I added a new type of fungus that grew along the ceiling in the shape of boughs, letting loose a constant drift of spores that appeared as air in the golden dust, swirling in static patterns. These were harmless, but in much the same way I killed the ogre, I could make them grow within anybody who inhaled them, a subtle layer of defense. In general, my defenses were far stronger. I had filled out the hidden caverns above the gardens as intended, with spiders who spun webs of opulent lacquer, and a substance that looked like raw rainbow-coloured pearls. They wrapped it around their skinny bodies as armour, and used it to glue their prey into living coffins and stew in digestive fluids. I had accepted their rather ugly method of eating in exchange for the beautifully efficient methods of killing. With their long limbs covered by a blaze of sharpened raka split, they could cut a man's head clean off the shoulders, and they lurked above the ceiling waiting for someone to pass beneath the trapdoors. But I hadn't stopped there. Anyone moving through the gardens would find that they needed to watch their feet, not just for the vipers lurking, but in fear of a new predator that I created. A slender and bronze-scaled goldfish that hunted in the long tendrils extended from its face. The prehensile and stronger than steel, they could whip out of the water and wrap around an ankle in a heartbeat, lurking in the deceptively deep pools of the garden that burrowed down into the mud for camouflage. And, of course, I had finished my explosive blooms. A few of them interspersed amongst the flora made them deadly surprise. I had learned the power of seasoned adventurers, and I had almost learned that they were only mortal who could caught off guard. I could at least be confident now at handling the average treasure hunter. The man Adamant had caught was definitely not going anywhere. A weaker variant of the somnolent bloom wrapped around the bars of his cage, ensuring that even once he woke up, he would be halfway drugged, unable to think clearly. Adamant threw him in, and I closed the gap between the bars, growing new glass to seal the entrance shut. With my captor secured, my golem donned on the clothes taken from the dead men. It was a tight fit, but he managed to squeeze himself into the looser garments. He hooded robes and the mask, leaving him convincingly dressed, if oddly warm for the season and the sweltering damp heat of the sewers. Having disguised himself, he picked through the remains of items. They were a coin purse full of round coins with holes punched in the middle, made of special dark iron that repelled my mana and any attempts to duplicate it. The only unfalsifiable currency in the world full of magic. An alchemical lantern with a blot of internal flame inside that I kept to study. A shark-tooth pendant that made me laugh with glee. And most importantly, a large bag containing numerous jars wrapped in a dark cloth. A few of them had broken open and released a sweet smell of honey. I ate it up, discovering that honey was heavy with magic, practically made of the stuff. I couldn't taste it in the classic sense, but I felt something very similar to a sugar rush when I feasted upon the concentrated manna. I had to hold myself back from devouring the lot. It would do perfectly. Adamant, dressed in a mask and dark clothes, fit right into the strange crowd the night market brought out. He was a hunchback and a giant, but there were far stranger shapes under the hoods and cloaks of the market's discerning customers. But none of the other customers were hiding a bat-faced homunculus under their hoods, I was sure. Sitting up in a quiet corner, he set out his wares, not just the jars of magic honey, but cages full of exotic creatures, serpents with wings and brilliant feathers, mushrooms in the shapes of human heads, a fish made of real and genuine gold in a glass jar, my own work. The people came by, they sighed as silent hand talk offers, and I had Isis teach me the language. I relayed to Adamant what to say in return. Payment in coin or jewels, no returns, caveat emptor. I did a brisk trade. In a matter of hours my goods were gone, and I, although I was fairly sure that I'd undercharged and been haggled lower still, had more coins than could fit into the stolen purse, and the 2 sparkling diamonds in Adamant's palm. But best of all, I had the ability to scout the marketplace. Adamant's roughly human proportions gave me the ability to set him wandering around the crowds and scanning the stalls for prizes to be stolen. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it. A statue in a cloudy garnet sat on the blanket, an only gem amongst a sprawl of glitzy trash laid out on the tray tablecloth. A poor showing, but oh, the statue shone all the brighter for being surrounded by tat. It was a strange beast, half horse, half snake, and the moment I laid eyes upon it, I knew. It had magic in it. Adamant signed to ask for the price, and the scrawny one-armed merchant held up a ridiculous number. As I haggled, Argent's mind suddenly brushed my own, sending urgent signals. A servant from the Institute had just donned a feather mask and headed into the sewers. She followed in his shadow, and there was no mistaking the route he took. He was heading for the night market. I had no more time to waste arguing. I dumped my coin purse into the man's lap and left him spluttering in surprise as I scooped up the statue with Adamant's clumsy hands, holding it clutched to my chest as we pushed through the crowd. Our net had caught something very interesting today. End of chapter. Chapter 1.3. Many questions and few answers. Argent shadowed the servants as he pushed through the bustle of the crowd, pausing to gawk at a woman in a glass tank, so small that it was almost a coffin. Her body ended in a long blue-scaled tail, and most people were staring at the exposed human side of her. The poor thing huddled in the corner of the tank, clutching her hands over her chest. The man paused to leer, but not for long, and he hurried on, into the section of the market that stunk of alchemy, of chemical, caustic scents. On sale were pickled specimens in jars and mysterious powders in air-safe containments, glass orbs containing colorful liquids, and sellers hand-signed for the love potions, virility tonics, and they sold things for the special clientele this market brought out. Night lanterns that dimmed the surrounding light and tinted lenses to see in the dark, oils to let you climb up walls like a spider. He proceeded past all of these without a glance. No doubt, this fellow had a purpose at the market today. In the farthest corner of the alchemy district, he exchanged a book wrapped in oilskins for 2 jars. As Argent edged closer, we saw the soil within the jars. Beneath the dirt, something was moving, causing the glass to shake faintly. As he left, Adamant was there to follow him. Argent slipped up at the golem's cloak and joined Isis in hiding within the hood. With the man heading directly back the way he came, I quickly realized that we weren't going to get any more answers out of him. We would return to the Institute where we couldn't follow him, if we let him. And I didn't intend on letting him. Adamant extended out a hand with a crooked finger, calling the earth in the jars. The glass cracked, the man turned, the contents came spilling out like there was a flash. Half the marker was blinded by the dazzling burst of light, the eye-searing wave of blue that had washed out over the percussive boom of thunder as a thunderbolt had leapt out of the shattered jars, splitting apart into numerous smaller threads of shuddering lightning as it struck off against the ceiling. For a moment it looked as if the tree of lightning had boomed in the market. As the lightning faded, the man was left twitching on the floor. Adamant had slid back into the crowd and the masked guards rushed forward to seize him. Argent clung to the edge of the enormous, sumptuous barge. The entire boat was made of rich red timber and gulf reef on the railings, with a dragon carved into the masthead. Black flags depicting 9 rats joined at the tails, forming into a wheel hung over the sides. As we hung on the sides, water lapping over Argent's tiny body, the electrocuted servant was hauled before the master of the market. We couldn't see from where we were, only listen in. I. The man was easily recognized by the thunderstruck stammering. Spit it out, man, or I'll take that useless tongue and feed it to my lovelies. The second had a foreign curl to his vowels, an imperious and proud way of speaking. I serve the high mage. And if His Majesty wanted Skyrest, why not ask me, eh? Why slink about the market when I've always given Mr. High and Mighty everything that he wants? He did. There was a muffled thump as flesh hitting flesh, wrenched a groan. I can tell when you lie before you even finish your stammering. I can tell. Smugness emanated from every word the second man spoke. Now tell me why, or I'll start letting my pets take nibbles out of you. There was a whistle, and a stuttering man cried out, "No! He thinks you poisoned the lost." We crawled higher. One man was kneeling on the floor and held down by 2 guards, while the second speaker was lounging on a throne of cushions beneath the barge's canopy of gold-embroidered cloth. He was whip-thin and lavishly dressed, with long, oily black hair. All around him the smoke curled in ribbons that twisted through the air of its own accord. Teeth and eyes briefly formed into the billowing grey smoke. Standing behind him was a pale woman in a loose, diaphanous dress. She had no eyes. From the bridge of her nose, 2 wings extended, dark brown with wings spotted like ringed patterns, covering the places where her eyes would be. She turned suddenly, looking right at us. Without a moment's hesitation, I had Argent drop down into the water and swim away at all speed. As she paddled for the shore, there was a scream and a splash behind us. Blood billowed up in the water as the unfortunate servant's body sunk like a stone. Chivlin woke up in prison, and not for the first time in his life. He groaned, stirring, noticing the strangeness of his surroundings. Not only the usual dingy cell, no. There was a flowery sweetness to the air, a fine gold dust that plumbed up as he shook himself awake. It had settled over his clothes and filled up the spaces beneath his collar. He sneezed, and a cloud of gold expanded from his breath and spittle. The bars were made of glass. Pausing, Chivlin began carefully recite everything that had happened in the day before. He had gotten drunk, of course, as one does. He had taken 2 of his more sober crewmen and headed to the silent market. And then a man of dirt, an explosive chap, a stumbling rat that ended in darkness. And then he woke up here. He flopped onto his back and groaned, horrified. His crew would be setting sail in the morning, if it wasn't morning already, and his scum of a first mate would waste no time leaving him behind. Curse the man. A small, bat-like creature perched atop the cage, staring down at Chivlin with its wide goblin eyes. "Hello?" he asked, puzzled. The little imp laughed at him, a mean little snicker. "Awake? Sleep well, upsy-daisy. The boss wants to speak with you." "The boss?" He asked to no answer. Straightening up, he glanced around. The garden of glass, the forest of fungal shapes in all colors. The subtle light glowed with the spore of the cilia of the jungle beyond. It was amongst the stranger things that he'd seen in his career. As he watched, the roots of the mushroom nearest to him wriggled across the ground. Dozens of strands tipped with tiny glowing bulbs interlocked into a curling formation to make letters. "Can you get me into the Mages Institute?" "Inside the Institute? I can, but if you're planning to take something out." Chivlin paused. It was best of his interest to be useful here, but exaggerating would only land him in a worse peril. "No." The fungal stalks rearranged, forming a new question. "What do you know about Olin Fremt?" "The High Mage. He runs things down here. He's the force beyond Kamantella, but everyone knows that. They say that he's mad, but that's true of all mages. They say," he leaned forward, whispering the last and most juicy tidbit, although he knew it wasn't much to save his skin, "they say he steals women away and they never seen again. Do you know the man who runs the silent market?" "Captain Emma?" The third question that Chivlin did not have a proper answer for. He gulped. No, I'm very much afraid that I don't know him." This time the letters did not rearrange, which meant that he had lost the captain's interest. A very, very dangerous thing to do. "Tell me, am I talking to a dungeon?" The strange creatures, the living environment, the faceless questions. Chivlin was wondering long enough to know what he was seeing. Nothing, no answer. The silence was as good as a death sentence. "Wait, no, I can still be of use," Chivlin pleaded, wringing the fabric of his mud-stained shirt and clenched fists. When a sudden realization reached up his neck, finding nothing there, the pendant was gone. "You took my necklace, my shark-tooth necklace. You wanted that, didn't you? Well, there's more where that came from." The silence pervaded the air, but he felt that it was a listening silence, not an ignoring silence, and it couldn't make the situation any worse to plead his case. "I'm a poacher, sir. I make an honest living in stealing and smuggling, and I can tell you that there is a world there of men like me and men such as richer than me, all of them dealing and thriving in golden eggshells, in the horns of exotic beasts or the teeth of sea monsters." Suddenly remembering his manners, he pulled off his hat of his balding head and clutched it to his chest. "And who do you imagine stands atop that world, dear sir? Dungeons! With the whim you can produce wonders, things men like me would pay a hand and arm for. Have you heard, my dear dungeon, of the far-off orchards where fruit grows and can extend the lifespans of mortal men? Of phoenixes that lay sapphires in place of eggs? Precious herbs that can cure any illness? Tonics that strengthen the body?" His eyes glistened with mist, as if the memory of those beautiful, expensive things were moving him to tears. Sir, my dear sir, they all come from dungeons. Let me live a little while, and I'll explain to you how to have anything that your heart so desires." He waited, breathless on his knees. Slowly, the mushroom stalks began to writhe their way into a new question. "Tell me more," they asked, "about the sapphires." End of chapter. Chapter 1.4 Foundations. I was letting Trivelin distract me with tales of God Country, the homeland that I'd forgotten, where manna rained from the sky in storms of golden light, and the earth was ruled by Goliath primordial beasts. Of the untamed shiftlands where mountains disappeared overnight and forests grew from a single seed in the space of a day. Of the lost city of Calain which had vanished, swallowed up by the changing earth. And of the wide Saravassa Sea, where under the cool green waters you could see the civilizations of merfolk, with their conch-shell towers and the blue-skinned woman. And of course, stories about the Sapphire Phoenix, which lived in a dungeon that had burrowed itself into the caldera of a volcano and wrapped its core in magma. Stories about the diamonds that fell from the eyes of certain maidens when they cried, and how those maidens had struck a deal with a god to be hidden away from the world that would exploit them. He had a way of making me almost drool with excitement what he wanted about the jewels. In a way, it was a relief to hear about things outside my little sphere of influence, to be reminded that there was a bigger, wilder world. If I let myself sink into myopia and forget how powerful the possibilities of being a dungeon were. I left him talking, unaware that he'd lost his audience. It was a struggle to pull myself away and return to my work. And there was always work. I had been fed a majority of the manna from Javelin's cohorts in the mangrove trees that I planted around the beach my walls, and that was finally bearing fruit. Crooked thin branches were rising, forming a canopy that would hold the ethereal cloud of manna that defined my territory and allowed me to manipulate the world. I only needed to tighten the seal. For that purpose, I created a new kind of spider. Unlike the ambush predators lurking above my garden in their opulent little dens, these were web spinners, patient hunters. Too big to live off flies, they would throw their webs into the waters like nets and drag up juicy fish. I made 6 in total, 6 to start an entire species. They had an emerald green carapace with an accent of bright, violent red that was plated segments of their armor met the rough edge seams, and a pattern of white across their soft underbellies. They would fill the trees with their silk and form walls thick enough to hold my manna. Fisherman spider, with powerful forelegs and steel-strong silk, these spiders cast its webs into the waters to catch prey, lurking amongst the roots of the mangrove tree. But I also knew this. They would bring attention. Mutant creatures were undeniably common, but a whole herd of them. And my mysterious forest had sprung up nearly overnight. I was playing with fire. At the same time, my worst enemies already knew that I was here. If I slowed my growth now, I would be helpless when they decided to act against me. There was a perilously narrow line to walk, and I was determined to walk it. I needed to draw the right kind of attention. These trees had planted were no normal mangroves. Glistening on their branches were round, green fruit distorted with bulging veins of gold, heavy with manna. I knew both were precious to humans. Lured by the promise of wealth, I hoped that they would be so focused on the bounty before them that they wouldn't delve any deeper. And if a few of them died in the pursuit, so much the better. Since the fishermen spiders were slow, ponderous creatures, I gave them friends. Small, leaping spiders as bright as jewels and in all different colors. Venomous as anything. The fishermen could at least defend themselves and at most distract the enemies, while the little ones ambushed from every angle within the trees. It would be easy enough to pick the fruits on the outer edges of the grove, but venturing deeper would mean wading through the waist-high waters and into the darkness where curtains of spiderwebs spanned every gap between the trees, where the branches gave them a chance to leap down from above. In the gloom, phantom enemies would lurk in every shadow. To add to this, the water itself would be home to my vipers, to my lurking reelfish. Several of my snakes had now reached a dense state of mana and said that they were close to evolution, and pushing them into a more dangerous environment would accelerate the process. This was something I'd realized. My creatures were slow to level because I had built food chains based on very ordinary creatures. Common vermin didn't provide enough mana to push their predators to the next stage of evolution, so I had to make uncommon ones. After devouring 2 humans and pushing most of their mana into the mangroves to avoid overload, I had plenty to toy with. Altering a little brown spotted mouse, I gave it powerful hind legs, allowing it to leap with incredible distances, almost impossible to catch. A species of lizard from the sewer walls that was introduced to the new grove, and with the expertise I'd earned growing my garden, I turned as translucent as glass, rewarding predators sharp-eyed enough to spot it. I even replicated a turtle that I devoured a few days earlier, and poured my remaining mana into it, thinking of it as a prize for whoever could crack the beast's reinforced shell and its snapping jaws. Soaring mouse. This little creature must eat constantly to maintain its muscular legs, moving by leaping fast distances in a single bound. They live brief, energetic lives and often meet untimely deaths. Glass skink. The small lizard spends most of its time in the absolute stillness. Almost invisible, it moves only to eat or to mate. Who knows what it thinks of all day. My goal was to build a food chain that would reward many different kinds of creatures, many different paths of evolution. By the time I finished thoroughly my mana once again, Adamant had returned with Isis and Ardent clinging to his shoulders. With the rum gone, there was nobody who could bring the prizes that we'd won today to my lair. With Adamant too large to squeeze through the tunnels, and the other 2 lacking the skill at swimming to navigate underwater labyrinths. Instead, I caused a crude earthen table to rise from the floor for Adamant to set his haul on. 2 sparkling diamonds, the garnet statue, and the knowledge of whatever Olin Frampt was up to. He was hiding from his compatriots. It was the statue that excited me most. While the actual gemstones used were for crude, flawed quality, it was so charged that it warped and flow of the mana nearby. By my count, it was equivalent to 20 or more points of mana that had been imbued into the cloudy red stone, which meant that my mana had just improved by double. Turning my focus inwards, I confirmed it. Gem Heart Dungeon, unnamed. Soul Fragments, 286 out of 300. Mana, 2.2 out of 32. Mana per hour, plus 0.4. Anima 1, Logos 2, Arcana 2. Blessings, Gift of Beauty, Gift of Sun. Born in adversity, far from God country, this dungeon has exhibited a combination of refined taste and ruthless cunning. I could have shouted with joy. Not only was my biggest weakness my low mana income, partly to be solved, but I had learned something. The statuette contained far more mana than I would have invested into such a low-quality gemstone, which meant a superior method to mine existed. And, to top it all off, it was on the cusp of leveling once more. I still hadn't understand what anima, logos, or arcana were, or how to raise them, but it was enough that I was nearing my 4th attunement. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd been hoping that the 5th one that I could select the higher-ranked attunements, the ones that were presently barred to me. I knew which one I'd choose too. Turning back to the statuette, I examined it closely. The mana within intricately designed. Within the ruby red stone, a set of runic diagrams started constantly, interlocking so each rotated through the next like enmeshed gears. It was an art that I couldn't even begin to decipher from the outside. For that matter, I had no idea what the statuette's purpose was. Reluctantly, I moved onto the diamonds. I had already settled on making them into shards. To deputize more of my creatures and expand the web of information I was able to trawl through Olin Frump's dealings with. His experiments had been mentioned, and that made me fear for a rum, cautiously afraid of what might happen. I reached out and tried to name the simple viper. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the feedback from attempting to exceed my limit of 2 names. I was deeply glad even in the initial hastiness gave way to a splitting mental pain. Glad, because it meant that somewhere out there a rum was still alive. Today I'd learned plenty about Olin Frompt, that he needed Skygrist, and that his dealings with the Prince of the Solid Market, that there was distrust between them, and it was the start of an understanding of what he was up to. At the same time, the clock was ticking. Always in the back of my mind, I was worried for my Stick, my noble and quiet friend. I dismissed my creations to rest, but Argent simply turned back, scuttling up the tunnels and towards the surface to return her vigil over this institute. She missed her brother. I did too. End of chapter. And that concludes this batch video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so down below. Until next time, I hope that you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.